All right, and as any long-term crop, you need to get comfortable with some sort of regularly scheduled media testing. All right, so you maintain an EC of a 1.5 to a 2 for a pour-through method, or a 0.9 to 1.3 for a 1 to 2 saturated paste method. And a healthy growing poinsettia will use a lot of fertilizer at this point. All right,
Yeah.
we've gotten the shade off of it, hopefully, or increase the light levels as much as we can, given our greenhouse structure that we're using. They're going to use a lot of feed. A lot.
Yeah, I think one of the things you want to watch here too is, yeah, I like to track the media, but if the plant is growing actively and you know, and I say no by actually testing, not believing your injector, but you know you're constantly feeding, and your media EC goes down, don't get worried. The plant's just taking the feed up. So it's equally as important to measure the EC in the media, but also just while you're out there, just check what's coming out the feed line. Make sure you know what is actually going in the pot. Many times, every year, I run into situations where everybody's going, I don't know why my plants are going yellow, I'm feeding it. And literally I had a situation where, yeah, I'm feeding it. I'm going, no. And I had to go out and literally put my meter on their feed line and go, no, you're not. Just because you hook the hose up to the line that has a red mark for the feed line doesn't mean there's feed. Prove it, right? So
yeah, use that same meter that you're checking the EC for. Use it on the feed line.
Use it on the feed line. So you got to know what's going in, because sometimes what will happen is you don't want to freak out from a low EC if you know that you're getting the feed, that you're getting that 250 constant and the EC is dripping down below 1. No worries if you know it's getting fed every irrigation. If you're an alternating feed to clear water guy, it's a little more complicated. That's why I like constant feed, for sure.
And this is a good time to plug the fact that you should calibrate your EC meter every once in a while. If you don't know the last time that it was calibrated, then that means you need to do it now.
And you should look at calibrating your injectors. Somewhat critical in nutrition, but hypercritical in growth regulation if you're going to drench with PGRs.
Yeah. And of course, don't forget to add a little bit of Molly and deliver 0.1 ppm with each fertilization, right?
There's a lot of high quality soluble feeds will have it in there. A lot of there's poinsettia versions of different formulations, and that's pretty much what they're doing, is they're kicking up the Molly a bit. If you don't have that, it's easy enough to get sodium malodate and throw a little bit of it in the feed. It's not going to cause any incompatibility issues with other products. You don't want to go heavy on it. It doesn't really cause too much damage in the plant, but Molly is not particularly safe for you. So be careful with it.
All right, so just kind of an example of what you kind of would expect with a pH and EC monitoring schedule here. You can see the crop was stuck week 32. Your EC started to go up a little bit on week 33, but now that you've been feeding out and you have roots actively growing out and taking up the feed that you're putting on, then it's going to drip down a little bit as it's sucking everything up that you're putting on. And, I wouldn't be too concerned, but just continuously monitor it, right? You want it will gradually drift up a little bit as we get later into the season, right? Because we're not going to have that high influence of the light levels, as well as the temperature starts to wean off and growth rate slows a little bit. So it will probably go up a little bit around your week 40. But this is a kind of a general, you do not need to hit these specific targets. Okay, but these are a general rule of what you would expect to see in a monitoring program.
And the other thing too, I think this points that the absence of feed tends to see the pH drift upward a bit as well. So that's just sort of a phenomenon that happens as well. I wouldn't necessarily let a high pH dictate your feed regime, but we'll get into. And in webinar 3, we'll talk a lot about why it's really important not to let the pH get too high. But in a nutshell, it's magnesium. So we'll get into that in the next webinar in detail.